Welcome to the GovComms podcast, bringing you the latest insights and innovations from experts and thought leaders around the globe in government communication. Now, here is your host, David Pembroke.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to GovComms, the podcast that examines the practice of content communication in government and the public sector. My name's David Pembroke, and thank you very much for joining me. Today, we head to the UK to speak to a good friend of mine, Mr. Conrad, who is the director of the Great Britain campaign at the Department for International Trade in the United Kingdom. Great is the government's or the UK government's most ambitious international campaign ever run, uniting the efforts of both the public and private sector to generate jobs and growth for Britain. The Great brand, and I'm sure many of you have seen the Great brand, has a current value of £271 million and has received 69 national and international awards to date. In 2014, Conrad's role at the Prime Minister's office at number 10 Downing Street expanded to include responsibility for delivering major cross-government campaigns and ensuring that the government's spending on communications is both efficient and cost-effective. Conrad previously worked at the Foreign and Commonwealth Office as head of public diplomacy and strategic campaigns, and at the Central Office of Information, and where he dealt with issues such as consumer rights and international exports. He later joined the Cabinet Office as Director of Strategic Communications, where he launched a new approach to government communication and was responsible for campaigns to counter terrorism and other societal issues. He joins me now on the line all the way from London. Conrad, welcome to GovComms.
David, thank you very much indeed. It's delightful to speak to you, and I hope you're having a good evening over there.
Certainly are. I certainly am, and I'm looking forward to our conversation because really, the Great campaign is one of the great campaigns we talk about the number of awards that it's won, the value of the brand, that's astonishing at £271 million, but it is one of the great government communication campaigns. So I wonder if you might take us back to the beginning of the campaign to take us through the problem that you were trying to solve and then the journey from the problem to solution to execution.
I'll be delighted to. If we all look back to 2011, it was a pretty tough time worldwide. We had a global economic crisis. Britain wasn't immune to that, and we had a financial economic situation. And the Brits, being Brits, I think were fairly gloomy in 2011 because we thought that the Olympics in 2012, in true British style, we weren't quite sure it was going to be a success. We were nervous about it, and Britain, the atmosphere and the mood in Britain, I would say, in 2011 was pretty gloomy. But some very far-sighted individuals in number 10 looked forward and said, "Look, hold on a second, guys. 2012 is going to be our year in the spotlight. We've got a Diamond Jubilee, we've got an Olympics, we've got a Paralympics. Let's assume that these are amazing events." And by the way, I tip my hat to the way you guys handled Sydney Olympics. But so we had a crisis, a genuine economic crisis, and what I'd call we had a massive opportunity, although people didn't really see it at the time. And these two compelling factors, a crisis and opportunity, led some pretty out of the box thinking. I don't know what it's like in the Australian government, but I mean the British government tends to operate in a fairly siloed manner. And this, yet in crisis, people begin to actually focus less on the barriers between them and more on more on how do we get together and how do we move forward. So it was this wonderful conjunction of economic crisis, massive opportunity where Britain was going to be in the spotlight, and some brave thinking in number 10 at the time that said, why don't we actually try and put together a way of joining up our entire international government communications performance under one new brand called the Great Britain brand. And let's actually join up our international tourism, our trade and investment activity, our student activity under one strong, proud, confident brand, and actually use it to create a legacy from the Olympics that actually will give us economic return on investment. So that was the real compelling reason. There was an opportunity called the Olympics, but there was also a crisis where we really need to actually generate increased GDP, increased jobs and growth for Britain by increasing the number of tourists coming to the UK, high quality students, and actually really upping our exporting and inward investment performance. And that was the basis for this brave idea. And I'll be honest with you in terms of the challenges. Putting the great back into Great Britain could be seen by some Brits as a bit flag wavy. It's not necessarily hugely cultural in that way, because we're actually a modest race. So it was slightly countercultural. It did meet some resistance, but because we had not very much time, because we decided we weren't going to do this by committee, but we were going to really move fast on it, we kind of landed the brand in 2012. I mean, British press had a good laugh about it, but most of the activity was overseas. And gradually, through the years past the Olympics, the brand or the campaigns began to actually generate return on investment. In order to continue the campaign, I was very keen that when we spoke to our financial director, mine was actually the Chancellor of the Exchequer at the time, so he was the guy with the money, that actually this wasn't seen as another communication campaign. And in fact, we called it, when we spoke to the Treasury and we put forward a business case for continuing it, we called it an economic program designed to generate jobs and growth for this country via these various mechanisms, these sectors which I've described. So, primarily at its heart, we happen to use sophisticated communications to do it, but primarily at its heart, we pitched it as an economic program designed to actually generate jobs and growth for this country. And the success began to roll on. Business got excited by it. Clearly, the early adopters from the business side were, those who actually flew the flag themselves: the Virgins, the British Airways, the Mulberries, the Burberrys, all the car companies like Jaguar, Land Rover, and Mini. They got it. They got the fact that there was a small team in Number 10 running a professional campaign, understanding the value of the brand and really pushing it forward in every single way. So business began to hook up and join us and helped us kind of multiply and magnify it. On the other area as well, we recognise that Britain has huge soft power assets, from the royal family to the likes of David Beckham and many, many other people. And we, in our exalted position in Number 10, literally picked up the phone to them and said, look, would you help us? And we appealed to a certain sense to their patriotism, but we managed to actually get strong individuals who were much more famous than our little campaign was, to actually give us their image rights, to help us on this and actually really help publicise the campaign further. So we began to basically get a ball rolling, and we measured it all the way, and we're very, very keen all the way through to actually measure everything we were doing about that. And as a result of it, it began to take off. We focused on markets, but we also ensured that the entire Foreign Office, the entire Department for International Trade had a really high quality bank of assets they could use. And that actually enabled us to extend the reach of the campaign to 144 markets around the world, where really our entire civil service and diplomatic force out in country were effectively acting as a really high-quality sales force with a strong brand, strong narrative, highly visual imagery behind them that actually really helped push the brand further.
It's stunning. It is absolutely stunning, that story that you've told. But I'd like to go back to this point around silos and around cooperation. And was that driven by the fact you had the burning platform of the global financial crisis? You had the crisis, and would it be fair to say that if you didn't have the crisis, you'd never have been able to get people to cooperate in the way that you did?
Well, that's a very wise point. I think that actually all governments love a crisis in a way, because that's actually when people act in a different way. And I will say that to keep the whole campaign going, to keep the urgency and the momentum of it, I kind of create mini crises to keep the whole thing going. That's certainly true. It was a crisis and an opportunity. I think really, in addition to that, two other powerful levers. Number one, we were sitting in number 10 Downing Street, close to the Prime Minister. So it was in the right place to be able to actually instruct departments to actually play ball. And that was really important. That, if you like, was the stick. The carrot was that actually we had our own budget. And so we weren't necessarily saying, here's a kind of, here's a brand or a logo, please use it. We're actually saying, come to us, join us, and actually you will benefit from it. And then, frankly, masses of diplomacy, which is why I always say when I entered number 10, I looked like I was a 23-year-old. When I left 5 years later, I looked a bit like 56, because it's tough keeping. We now have 20 government departments working with us on the Great Britain campaign, and keeping those government departments together, working together, cooperating, and understanding that actually they've given up a little to gain a lot is a real art in its own right.
Now, the actual creative idea, I think it's very powerful. And if people haven't seen it, just make sure you go online and have a look at it, because the number of applications of the brand are stunning. And the fact that you say you have now 20 government departments using the brand to create value and impact for the citizens of the UK, and indeed, well, more broadly than that. Where did the idea come from? And as you say, you were under pressure to come up with a great idea. How did this idea actually come together? Where was the insight? Was it a deep dive into market research where the insight was clear, or was it some other flash of inspiration?
Well, I'd love to say it was really heavily researched at the time, but we were moving quite fast. We clearly, on the kind of the tourist side, on the education side, we had a lot of market insight. We had a lot of understanding of where the UK was considered to be strong, what we're in a sense, what our perceptual strengths were, what our weaknesses were. A classic one is actually in tourism, where our culture and heritage. We knew that we were very, very well thought of throughout the world for our culture and heritage, but people as far abroad as China and Brazil didn't really know we had a countryside. And so, for 5 years, we pounded the fact that we've got a beautiful countryside out of London, and we can see that coming through now with more people coming to London saying they're going to leave London and go and discover the countryside of the UK than actually saying we're going to come to London and leave. So we were able to understand on one level our audience insights in that way, but on the macro level, it was no amount of insight would have really come up with the Great Britain campaign. It just needed a flash of inspiration and a kind of brave idea. I mean, it's so simple. It helps that if you're thinking about country branding, it helps that obviously we are called Great Britain, so that actually gives us some sort of authenticity and provenance. But I remember when we first saw it, there was a kind of, you can't say that. And there was that moment of both insight and, I would say, a sharp intake of breath. And of course, like any brand, when it's new, it was very simple, very powerful, very strong. And we all began to actually sort of push it forward. Interesting fact is, another thing that I think I'm especially pleased with is we put it next to the Union Jack, and that's something in the past the government had been walked away a bit from the Union Jack, and we wanted to say, look, actually, in terms of a noticeable icon, the Union Jack is a very, very well-known icon, and it's known around the world. It's I would hope broadly positively received, but it gave us instant awareness around the linking together the word great with the Union Jack. We were able to cut through the competitive clutter pretty quickly with a bold, simple idea.
It's interesting you talk about that need for senior leadership of the country, that political leadership to know, to understand and to own this campaign. How did that presentation go on that particular day when you were pitching it in?
Oh, I remember those days in the bunker. I think that actually, it was a very talented agency called Mother, and I'll name check them, who came up with the initial idea of Great. And there were some other ideas as well. And it was, frankly, there really was a sharp intake of breath with it, a feeling that actually this was very strong and powerful, but did we all feel comfortable with it? And it took some bravery just to say, look, keep it simple, keep it strong, and be confident and be proud of who you are, but not arrogant. Actually say it gave us an uplifting thought, which was really important, because if you back it up and you start looking at what any country has to offer, we have an enormous amount to offer the world. As I say, my favourite words I used to speak to Prime Minister was that, think about being British is our favourite word is sorry, but you can't necessarily you can't necessarily apologise yourself to international success. So, you can't say sorry when you're standing in front of something that says, technology is great or innovation is great. It's up there. It causes you to put your shoulders back and actually speak very positively about your strengths to other countries.
But again, I'm really interested to know your observations about the confidence or the bravery or the courage to make this step, and just how important the contextual piece was, that there had been, that Britain, it was a gloomy time, that there were challenges. Did you need that context to get this up? And if circumstance had been different, do you think the reactions might have been different?
I think actually, in many ways, the reverse. If we'd all known that the Olympics was going to be a triumphant success, the context may have been more confident, and it might have, in a sense, been easier to get that great word through. That's why I think I really put it down to kind of effectively the courage of the teams involved to actually get behind this strong idea at a moment of gloom, to put it forward. I must say, we had, the British press, we had a week, when it was launched, when it was announced in the UK, the British press had a field day. They laughed their heads off because it just felt, it felt out of context. We appeared in every TV show, comedy show, with lots of cynical laughter, saying, "How on earth could you be saying this at this time? This is another mad government initiative." And we felt quite challenged by that. But once we got it going and once it was out there in markets, the most important thing was not our own feelings, it's actually how the audience responded to it. And that's when things began to really feed back. And I just remember one thing that really filled me, that I felt sort of a very memorable moment was, in those kind of hard early days of doing it, I got a call in from number 10 switchboard. I was there, and I got a call in from outside, and somebody said, there's quite an angry-sounding gentleman here wanting to speak to the director of the Great campaign. And, my stomach turned to water. I thought, oh, gosh, what have I done wrong here? This is awful. Another kind of abuse from somebody. And this rather gruff voice said, just want to say that I'm standing in front of one of your posters in Mumbai. I thought, here we go. And he said two things. I've never felt so well supported by the British government. I've never felt so proud to be British. And I suddenly thought, you know what? This is appealing to audiences, but it's actually also giving our people, our hardworking businessmen in far-flung parts of the world, a spring in their step. The government's behind them on that. And I suddenly thought, we've got something here. We've got something that's difficult to describe, but actually viscerally, it makes people stand up and actually be a little bit more confident in the way they go about their business.
So how long was it from when you had those moments, those early days where you're being laughed at, you're being pilloried for the idea, people aren't quite getting where it's at. How long did it take before you started to feel that it was working?
I think there was a really, really hard period of actually from here's a logo to actually here are posters all over the world. And that was a really concentrated 3-month period of very, very manic work. I think as we began to feel the atmosphere of the Olympics, we switched off great during the Olympics. We launched it before and we picked on afterwards. We weren't going to try and compete with the Olympics. But things began to happen and people began to ring us up in the Olympic thing and say, look, hey, we've got some free ad space. Do you want to put your posters up here because we like them? We also began to get, started getting some figures in. The tourist authority started saying, you know what, awareness of this new campaign, because we were tracking it and we were doing audience research, awareness of this campaign is high. And we thought that's a good start. Obviously it isn't all about awareness, but somehow it began to feel actually as if these bold statements, they were actually coming off. And we also did a lot of what I'd call events, stroke PR stunts. And I remember, some of them we had a very big kind of event up Sugarloaf Mountain in Brazil, which Prince Harry came to, and obviously lots of Brits, but masses of sort of Brazilian business people, the mayor of Brazil, influencers, and so on. And you suddenly started seeing these videos, and you suddenly started seeing the effect it had of having a member of the royal family in front of playing football with kids, in front of great in the background, or in a business environment, and you actually suddenly started looking at that and saying, without in any objective eyes, this is actually looking pretty cool, because we all know that in communications, you've really got to be really simple to get your message across, and suddenly seeing these big statements next to powerful individuals, or David Beckham, who very kindly gave us his image rights, we suddenly started seeing it next to him. You saw, actually, this works. This is beginning to work. So both what I call the heart began to work, as well as the head. The head was actually the figures coming in, the return on investment, the awareness, the perception figures. But the heart was actually your gut instinct, which was churning at the time when you saw it land in market, not in the UK, but in markets around the world. I remember seeing posters in Sydney. Thought, oh, those are good-looking posters. Wow, those belong to us. You began to say, this is good, this is good. It feels and looks good. It feels, fun enough, it feels and looks much more confident than we were feeling at the time.
Yeah. How important was the, co-locating the campaign with an event like the Olympics? Because it's interesting when you mentioned the Sydney Olympics in Australia. I think there's no question that Australia, turned a corner, around not just Sydney, but I think more broadly there was a great confidence and a great pride in the way that the Olympics was held, and it was such a great event. How important was that successful games in being able to build that momentum for great?
It was, in a sense, it was something to work to, and it was also a springboard to give us a platform from. I think that internally, of course, it meant that actually, as the Olympics took place, there was there were big groups of people focused on single-minded on the success of this, and therefore great in a sense was seen as part of that, which really helped. With such a massive event that actually government can no longer necessarily act in its business as usual way. So that was helpful internally. I think that the fact that the Olympics was a success, it was. The ceremony, the opening ceremony was, quintessentially British. It was quirky. It was humorous. It was authentic. Really added a spring to it. And I remember a lovely apocryphal saying, I think, which somebody relayed to me. But it was a Chinese somebody in China who said, and remember, we're fighting some quite deeply held stereotypes at the time of Britain being a kind of a heritage nation steeped in the past, great tradition, but really not very, very modern. And I remember a Chinese official had said to somebody, he said, I always thought that Britain was a bit of a backwater. I mean, beautiful, but, famous for Stonehenge, but not for nanotechnology. And then I saw Thomas Heatherwick's stand at the Shanghai Expo. Then I saw the Olympics. Then I saw the Great Britain campaign. And he's heard to have said, how long have you been one of the most creative and innovative islands on earth? And I thought, now that's really doing it. So I think we captured the moment. We surfed a wave, to put it the right way. We knew it was happening. We were bold enough to see, or courageous enough to anticipate it was going to be a success. And I think, frankly, it put rocket boosters on the campaign itself, which is why so many other nations, in a way, look at those major events and say, how can we, with that moment in the spotlight, how can we actually capitalize on it to make a strong statement about our country that isn't just about burnishing our reputation, but actually trying to take that reputation and turn it into jobs and growth or economic return. And that was very much the design of it.
And interestingly, I think you made the point earlier that when you were pitching for the funding that you needed to obviously encourage your colleagues in the different government departments, as you say, you were turning up not just with a style guide, but you had money to spend to help them to achieve their particular objectives. You pitched it as an economic development program. It wasn't pitched as a communications program. Tell me about, that insight as well, and have you continued to pitch it that way and therefore continue to get more funding?
Yeah, I mean, there've been many moments along the way. I must say, I was particularly proud of that moment because I've been working in government for about 14, 15 years from them. And obviously, I recognise there's probably many governments around the world that when you start speaking to the Treasury, the idea of communications isn't necessarily right up the food chain in terms of seen to be hugely valuable, or certainly not seen to be something that actually can generate money. Communications, even in modern marketing organizations, communications or marketing seem to be a cost rather than investment. And I recognized quite early on that we had an idea on our hands, but that idea could just be a campaign that lasted a year or two and went its merry way. So I was puzzling on how do I give this legs? How do I sustain it? We've got a break. We've got that moment in time when government departments came together around a strong idea. But that was great. But actually, it could just die as an initiative. And that was when I began to think, look, actually, if we can demonstrate real return on investment and actually put this not as a communications project, but actually as a serious economic program, we've got a chance of actually influencing the Treasury to support it in many ways. And I became quite obsessed by the evaluation, or very obsessed by the evaluation behind the campaign. I strongly believe that actually, communications or marketing does have a return on investment. It can be measured beyond the kind of the softer measures of perception, of confidence, and so on. But actually, we can attract inward investment via our marketing. We can actually attract tourists via our marketing, and our tourists come and they spend money, and that can be attributed to the campaign. So I was really keen to actually look at the kind of the metrics and the evaluation behind the campaign, set it up so that actually it had a long-term future. And that's actually what happened, the combination of showing the numbers behind the campaign, as well as, of course, talking to ministers, prime ministers, and actually who naturally got it, funnily enough. One sometimes says that ministers have short attention spans, but every minister I spoke to, and we've had many working on the Great Campaign, has always recognised, A, the need for quality, B, the need for consistency over time, so it gets stronger and stronger and stronger, it rolls forward, and also and have lent their support in that way. So we really targeted the Treasury and understood their language and wrote a business case that was written in the language of economic return rather than the language of communications. And that's something when I talk to and train young communicators around government, I say, for goodness sake, understand that the communications you're doing, it's an investment, not a cost. You have to actually treat it as that way, as any other government project involving taxpayers' money or shareholders' money. It must be treated as an investment rather than a cost. And evaluation and the obsession with evaluation, I think, is what's given this campaign its long life, because it's enabled us to successfully bid for more funding to sustain it.
So take me through that idea that once you've said, okay, I know I have to tell this story in such a way to Treasury such that it will make sense. So how did you pull that together? How was it that you were able to assemble a set of metrics that you were able to set as not only a benchmark, but be able to continue to demonstrate over time the impact and the return on investment?
Okay, so there are a number of ways to measure it. I mean, tourism is for me, the most well-formed and well-evaluated activity. So you do your controls, you do a pre-campaign tracking, you go in there, and this is about interviewing panels, saying, have you heard of us? No, I haven't. You do the campaign itself, you go back to those panels, you start saying, have you heard about this campaign? Has it increased your consideration to come to the UK? Has it changed your view? Are you actually going to consider coming to the UK? So that's your kind of communications metrics. You can then begin to model that out, because we know the value of the monetary expenditure expenditure of, let's say, a Chinese tourist or an Australian tourist, and we can actually ascribe additionality of, has the Great Campaign actually encouraged them to come? Nowadays, of course, as technology becomes more sophisticated, we're able to track their journeys through. So another area, for instance, in the student area, international student work, and by the way, you guys are very, very good at this in terms of attracting international students. We can see how we've reached parents, or most importantly, potential students, and how they've come through to the UCAS website. They've applied for universities, and actually they've gone to a university. And we know the value, or in monetary value, of that student going to that university. And therefore, we're able to take a very conservative estimate of the additionality that we have created, or that we can ascribe to the campaign itself. So more difficult in areas like exporting or inward investment, there's a tiny, tiny additionality. But if you reach out at the moment, as we're doing with our inward investment campaign, we're using a lot of LinkedIn work. We're actually reaching out to potential investors. They'll come to us. They'll come to our sites. We'll qualify their interest, and then we'll give them opportunities. And if they take up those opportunities and actually become and actually invest in the UK, we may make a tiny 0.01% additional value brought on by the Great Britain campaign. So we're highly conservative, but we're always looking to try and demonstrate a financial return from the activities that we actually do. And then you move into areas which are far more difficult to measure, which are areas of what I call soft power. And that is, I think, a vital area for the campaign, because Britain has, huge cultural assets, sporting assets, and so on, which make us a very attractive nation to come to. But we must always remember, and sorry, I'm getting on my sort of high horse here, that actually even the toughest, most rational inward investor has emotion, and has emotional reasons to choose one country over another. And we know that through our research. We know that actually, if you look at all the reasons that somebody may invest in a country, some of the top reasons around, do you know what, I'll feel welcome here. Yes, of course, the governance, the infrastructure, all, the climate and the opportunity, but will I feel welcome here? Will my family feel welcome here? Will my workmates come here? Do I like this country? Am I familiar with it? Language, of course, helps in that way. So soft power is a huge asset. And in fact, we can see a correlation between, and this is again where the various strands of the Great Campaign working together are really, really helpful. We can see a correlation that actually people who either come to a country to study, or come to a country as a tourist, or experience that country's culture in their own country, are actually up to 30% more likely to invest in that country. There is a real correlation between familiarity with a country and your desire and willingness to do business with it. And that's what GREAT recognises when we keep all these various strands of tourism, students and education, and the hard-hitting inward investment and exports together, that they overflow and they complement each other.
So in terms of your team and the skills that you require to be able to assemble these conservative but rigorous models, do you have data scientists working with you and who are doing the models?
We do now, and we have econometrics pouring through the work as well as it's become more sophisticated. They tend to be. I mean, it's a strange structure because we're not one big department. And people used to say to me, "How many people are running the Great Campaign?" And I said actually 8. Because that's how many people we could fit into number 10 Downing Street without being kicked out. But then, of course, that 8 in the HQ then translated into 15, 20 in the tourism office, 20 in British Council, and then, of course, all the ambassadors and the teams around the world. So it very quickly became quite a large number. So often, some of the really sophisticated data science that's being done is being done by our tourist authority, or by what we call our delivery partners, rather than us in HQ. We tend to be the conductors of the orchestra.
Yeah, it's just such a wonderful example of that collaboration and teamwork, isn't it? Where you're able to take an idea, engage with people. Yes, you had some funding to get people moving on it, but then as it moved, you were able to see other partners join in. And obviously, what's next for the Great Campaign? How do you sustain it into its next 10 years? And do you think it will last that long?
Well, I'm always asked this by diplomats who look me in the eyes and say, "Come on, Conrad, how long is the Great Britain campaign going to go on?" And I often say to them, "How long are you going to be in post?" And they say 3 or 4 years. I say, "Oh, way beyond then." The theory, the absolute theory, is there is no reason why this campaign cannot last for a good 15 to 20 years. We know this through some of the most famous, strong tourist brand campaigns around the world, yours included, or New Zealand or India, that actually the longer you keep the basic brand, you can change the campaigns around it, but keep the basic brand in a highly competitive and cluttered world. It has real saliency by its longevity. So in many ways, I view in a perfect world that this campaign should continue. We are constantly refreshing it, though, and people often think it's fixed. It's fixed. What is fixed, if you like, are the other key assets: the Union Jack, the lozenge, the word great. But there's an awful lot of different visual treatments, different campaigns. I mean, you can't, especially in a world like tourism, you're refreshing your campaigns regularly as your insight changes, as your segmentation improves. But in all areas of the Great Campaign, it's moving to a point where, in many ways, if you look at some of the work we're doing now, you'd recognize them from the original campaign because of the basic assets and the basic, what I'd say is the belief and the quality behind it. But they're very, very different propositions put forward, especially and thank you, by the way, for not mentioning the Brexit word, but especially, obviously, as Britain, looks for a new role in the world as we go forward. And so the campaign, the brand remains fixed, but the campaigns around it are changing constantly. But the spirit and the emphasis on quality and collaboration are really central to it.
Well, Conrad, it is a work of art, and congratulations for everything that it has achieved, because you raised that point before. It's that simple idea. It's that clean, clear idea, but then to be able to be sharp enough to be able to get it moving, to take advantage of big events, to take advantage of the context that was challenged, to generate the courage, to then generate the teamwork that has then taken it to where it is today. It's enormous credit to you and to the rest of the communications team, but also the others in government, to be able to see that it could solve problems for them. It could create impact. And I'm sure that you've had ideas come from all sorts of different places that you'd never have thought of. But by building that enthusiasm and that momentum, that it's created this wonderful idea really, that is, created such great impact. So it's a masterful piece of work.
Oh, well, thank you. It's very kind of you, David. And you're quite right. I mean, I used to work in advertising, and the mantra, and I was a creative in advertising. But one thing I was hopefully humble enough to know, there is no monopoly on ideas. So it's really important to keep your mind open. David, you're very, very kind. I guess you're going to probably switch me off now. So I just wanted to get my good luck wishes in early to say good luck with your cricket, good luck with the team over here. They're doing really well. Shame about India, who's actually going to be challenging for us all. But I wish your team all the very best.
Well, thank you, Conrad. Thank you very much. That's very generous of you. And yeah, I'm not sure that this year will be our year, but I hope it builds to be another great campaign, and you'll be able to work very, very cleverly off the back of that. And take advantage of the spotlight that is once again on the UK during the Cricket World Cup. But to you, Conrad, thank you so much for joining us once again. And ladies and gentlemen, there is a part 2 of this interview with Conrad Bird, as we discuss with Conrad the year of marketing in the UK, which is another idea that I'm absolutely fascinated by. But so tune in next time on the GovComms podcast, where we explore with Conrad Bird, not the Great Campaign, we've done that one, but it's a great insights in that. But again, the Government Communications Service nominating this year as the Year of Marketing. I'm fascinated as to how they are going to pull that off. So join us once again in a couple of weeks' time when we will speak once again to Conrad Bird to talk about the year of marketing. So thanks very much for Conrad for joining us, and thanks to you, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are in the world listening to this podcast. Thank you so much for the feedback. I was pulled up in the street the other day by someone who said, I really like your podcast because it really works for me. And that's the purpose of it. It's to reach out to government communicators to inspire you to do, dare I say it, great work. So thank you for coming back once again. I'll be back at the same time in a couple of weeks, but thanks for joining us, and it's bye for now.
You've been listening to the GovComms podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to rate and subscribe to stay up to date with our latest episodes.